I speak to you now from the greatest country that ever was, is, and will be. The great experiment, the envy of the world, the United States of America. And united we are until the aggression of foreign governments brought our great nation down to their level. And united we will be again, yet for a poison coursing through the veins and arteries of the very heart of this great nation. What is poisoning America? Is it the radioactive waste that seeps still into the very soil? Is it the devastation caused some 200 years prior? No, it is you. You who listens to this broadcast. You, the irradiated offspring of a tainted gene pool. You who desecrates the very landmarks of this country with your ignorance. You who infests the land of our forefathers like the plague you are. You are a poison, and the Enclave is the antidote. God bless the Enclave. God bless America.
Shadowy, powerful, and with hidden agendas, the Enclave is one of the oldest factions in the Waste, having technically existed in the years prior to the Great War. The Enclave was originally formed by powerful members of the United States military, government, and important civilians who effectively ran the country from behind the scenes. With nuclear Armageddon deemed to be inevitable, the organization focused on surviving the Great War to continue the fight against China and allow America to survive. To this end, they constructed multiple hidden shelters scattered across the country, the most notable being the Poseidon Energy oil rig, also known as Control Station Enclave. And it was to these fallout shelters that the Enclave hid within, on the fated day of October 23rd, 2077, when the Great War finally came to pass. Sheltered within their impenetrable bastions, the Enclave survived as planned and took stock of the world around them. With a loss of communication to their bases across the country, the Enclave began to reevaluate their original purpose. Continuing the war against China would have to be put on hold, indefinitely. The secondary goal became their true purpose: reclaim the United States of America. Okay, so with the history lesson done and dusted, we'll dive into the meat and bones of this video. On the day of the Great War, the United States could be argued to have functionally ceased to be. In its place was a horrific radioactive wasteland, caked in the debris and nuclear fallout of the old world. For the many survivors, the idea of nationhood and government went completely out the window, their only concern being where their next meal was coming from. And while the former US residents began the fight amongst each other, the Enclave watched silently from their hidden bunkers, watching and waiting. Although being one of the most powerful factions in the Wasteland, for the average Wastelander, the Enclave was just another power armor-wearing group, similar to the Brotherhood of Steel, with some trappings of the former pre-war government. In the Enclave's mind, however, they weren't imitating the former US government, they were the United States government. The Enclave's leader, the former US president, wasn't just the leader of a new faction, he was still the president of the United States, in one unbroken chain since George Washington. The question ultimately is if they are the legitimate continuation of the United States government, and therefore the rightful rulers of America itself. If viewing this from a pre-war lens, you could say yes. The Enclave were comprised of many of the leading members of the United States government, military, scientists, and businessmen and women. Their installations, property, and infrastructure seen around the United States legally still belong to them. The Wastelanders, who consider their nation something of the past, could be argued to still be their citizens. For the Enclave, the Wasteland was still the United States, simply just fallen on hard times, giving themselves a justifiable casus belli to conquer the Waste. The status of the post-war United States could be looked at via a thought experiment, known as the ship of Theseus. The premise of this being that the Greek hero Theseus had a ship, which in his journey became damaged and worn, with each nail, timber, and parchment of sail eventually being entirely replaced. With each part of the original ship changed over, was the ship still fundamentally the same as the original? From a practical standpoint, no. No part of the original ship is still in existence, and so it ultimately is no longer the same boat. However, it could be argued that for Theseus, it was still his original ship, a little different in shape, with some new bits and pieces added, but still essentially the same vessel he started with and returned home within. The same could be said of the post-war United States. The nation had been torn apart at the seams and completely unrecognizable in the years after the bombs fell. But not so for the Enclave. America may be obliterated with nuclear weapons, tainted by irradiation, its states and cities reduced to ash, but it would still always be America. It was more than a place. It was an idea, something greater than the individual and something that they still believed in. It would almost be noble, if not for how morally reprehensible their actions were. While the Enclave wished to pacify the mainland and rebuild America for humanity, their definition on who constituted human became a bit warped. Understandably, they considered ghouls and super mutants to no longer be human. However, they also extended this xenophobia to regular human beings who had simply just been exposed to radiation. Given the fact that the vast majority of post-war humans had no access to any form of fallout shelter, except for vault dwellers, most of the human population were, in the Enclave's eyes, mutants, and therefore undeserving of life. On 2 separate occasions, the Enclave have attempted to commit genocide by the usage of a modified, forced evolutionary virus, aimed at killing any mutated species. Both times, they'd been stopped by one of the very impure inhabitants that they considered to be so inferior. These traits of aggression, cruelty, and xenophobia were directly inherited from the former United States, yet amplified in a post-apocalyptic world. It's not to say that all members of the Enclave were completely evil. Former Enclave soldiers such as Cannibal Johnson and Judah Krieger are noted to be decent men, with Judah stating that,
I admit that some of the folks in charge were pretty ruthless. The rest of us, though, we were just trying to civilize things. The NCR was still new, and it didn't look like they'd last all that long.
Even one of the antagonists of Fallout 3, Colonel Autumn, is slightly less ruthless than other leaders of the Enclave. While President John Henry Eden wished to annihilate the impure by contaminating the water purifier, Colonel Autumn instead wished to utilize the water as a bargaining chip to entice Wastelanders to support the Enclave. His actions still can't be classified as necessarily benevolent, as he was willing to execute civilians in order to appropriate the water purifier for his own purposes. Even in the hypothetical scenario where the Enclave under Colonel Autumn were victorious and took charge of the Wasteland, the lives of the capital Wastelanders would not improve drastically. Obviously, the Enclave's technology and capability would be able to pacify the region, technically making it safer. However, there would still be xenophobia directed at the Wastelanders deemed to be impure. The following Enclave mission directive can be located, which specifies their plan for the civilian population of the capital Wasteland. Mission Directive: establish and enforce Enclave presence among general populace. Disposal of genetic non-compliance offenders. Step 1. Monitor civilian movement in area and debrief Superior regarding any events of notable significance or regularity. Step 2. Distribute purified water rations to civilians willing to submit to genetic compliance screening. Participation in screening is compulsory for all civilians, and use of force is authorized in enforcement. Step 3. Genetic non-compliance offenders should be detained at checkpoint. Step 4. To conserve consumption of Enclave resources, detainees should be disposed of by flame only when withholding facility becomes overcrowded or detainees become unmanageable, whichever comes first. To understand the inner thought processes of the Enclave, it can be surmised as such. Members of the Enclave, from the president all the way to a foot soldier, believed that they were fighting to protect America. They were convinced that their actions were right, as they were still fighting for their country. It's easy to excuse the committal of evil acts when you consider yourself one of the good guys. From a post-war standpoint, the Enclave may actually be the legal continuation of the United States government. However, this does not excuse their actions, both past, present, or potentially future, in their journey to lay claim to the Wasteland. And if they wish to inherit the mantle of their successor from the former government, they must also inherit their share of the blame for the Great War itself. And ultimately, if a government can lead its people and country directly into the maw of nuclear holocaust, can they really be considered deserving of the right to rule it?